The Romanovs didn't just die, they vanished into rumour. And rumours are like roaches. You can stomp them all you like, they just scuttle into the walls and come back with friends. After July 17th, 1918, people needed a survivor. Not because it made sense, because the alternative was unbearable. So when a mysterious young woman appeared in Berlin in 1920, pulled from a canal after an apparent suicide attempt, Europe practically leaned forward in its chair. She wouldn't give her name. She wouldn't give her story. She would give nothing. And that nothing was irresistible. 27th February 1920, Berlin. A young woman jumps from the Bendlerstrasse bridge into the Landwehr Canal and lives, which is inconvenient for everyone involved, including her. A police sergeant drags her out half dead, and she's taken to the Elizabeth Hospital. No papers, no ID, no useful answers. She refuses to tell anyone who she is. So the system does what the system does. It labels her. Fräulein Unbekannt. Miss Unknown. Which sounds mysterious and romantic until you realize it's also what you'd call a suitcase you don't want to touch. She's moved to Daldorf Asylum, now Wittenau, and she stays there for 2 years. Doctors note scars on her head and body and an expression that says, "I have seen things, and I will bite you if you ask." They also note she speaks German, but with an accent some staff describe as Russian. And this is the first crack in the door. Because in 1920, post-war Berlin is crawling with Russian émigrés, aristocrats, officers, courtiers, the human leftovers of a collapsed empire. They're traumatized, they're nostalgic, they're desperate. And desperate people will absolutely project a fairy tale onto the first silent girl who looks like grief. Enter Clara Peutert, a fellow patient. In early 1922, she claims the unknown woman is Grand Duchess Tatiana. Tatiana, the tall one, the elegant one, the one who could organize a household while the adults fell apart. So already we have a problem. Tatiana was notably tall. And into the asylum comes Baroness Sophie Buxhoeveden, former lady-in-waiting to Empress Alexandra, a woman that knew that family like the back of her hand. She takes one look up and down at the girl and basically says the most aristocratic version of absolutely not. Too short for Tatiana. And she leaves, cold and unconvinced. A few days later, the unknown woman notes something that matters. I did not say I was Tatiana. Clock that. Because from the beginning, the identity was often put on her before she fully wore it. The story attaches itself first. Then she, for whatever reason, allows it to stick. And once it sticks, it spreads. The girl is taken out of Daldorf and bounced between protectors like a haunted heirloom. She stays with Baron Arthur von Kleist in Berlin, a Russian émigré with a past and, allegedly, ambition. A Berlin detective, Inspector Franz Grünberg, is involved too, and even he suspects people may have ulterior motives. Because here's the unspoken truth. If the monarchy ever returned, lol, being a man who saved a Grand Duchess could be worth a lot. The girl begins using the name Anna Tchaikovsky, Anna as a short form of Anastasia, because subtlety is for people not trying to become famous. Meanwhile, rumours evolve. Not Tatiana now, Anastasia, the one the world wants to have survived. And people start coming to look at her like she's a painting at auction. Princess Irene of Hesse, the Tsarina's sister, visits. She does not recognize her. Crown Princess Cecilia of Prussia visits. The girl refuses to speak to her, leaving Cecilia confused. Russian émigrés come in and out, squinting at her face like recognition is something you can force if you stare hard enough. And then Anna becomes seriously ill. A tuberculous infection in her arm. Hospitals, surgeries, weight loss, near death. This is important because it means a lot of the identification happens while she is weak, semi-conscious, drugged, and barely able to function. Perfect conditions for a clean, fair test, obviously. Now we bring in Nicholas II's sister, Grand Duchess Olga Alexandrovna. And this is where your saga gets deliciously tragic. Olga had lived through the collapse. She'd escaped, and she was deeply attached to the memory of Anastasia. But she didn't want to drag her mother, the Dowager Empress Maria Fyodorovna, into this unless it was real, because Maria Fyodorovna had already lost everything. She initially refused to leave Russia after the revolution, clinging to the ruins like a woman refusing to abandon the body of her life. Only in 1919 was she finally evacuated from Crimea by a British warship, HMS Marlborough, pushed by family and necessity, and she eventually returned to Denmark, her homeland, where she lived in exile. And yes, despite the fact the Dowager Queen Alexandra of England was Maria's beloved sister, the Romanov family's relationship with Britain had a nasty bruise on it. Because George V did pull back from offering asylum to Nicholas II and his family in 1917, and historians still argue over the mix of politics, public opinion, and royal caution behind that decision. So the family drama was not exactly healed. While the Danish court tried to keep news of the imperial family's murder from Maria, Olga knew her mother was not stupid. If she heard the words, "Anastasia survived," hope would resurrect, only to be murdered all over again. So Olga does the cautious thing. She asks Pierre Gilliard to investigate first. The Swiss tutor, a man who spent years with the imperial children, a man who knew Anastasia's face, voice, mannerisms, the unglamorous details. In other words, if anyone could spot a fake, it was him. Gilliard and his wife meet Anna in Berlin while she's hospitalized. And this is where the story becomes what it always becomes, a tug-of-war between emotion and evidence. On the maybe it's her side, Anna has scars. Anna has trauma. Anna has a certain look at certain angles to certain people on certain days. And yes, supporters point to a foot issue. Bunions/hallux valgus, something Anastasia reportedly had, and Anna also had. It's the kind of evidence that sounds convincing until you remember that half of Europe has bunions. On the girl please side, Anna does not speak Russian. She does not speak French, the prestige language of the imperial court. She does not speak English, which the Romanov children spoke fluently within the family. Instead, she speaks German, and she speaks Polish. And a Russian Grand Duchess speaking Polish is not quirky. It's a screaming, blaring, neon red flag. Because Imperial Russia did not exactly treat Poland as a fun cultural exchange program. Polish was not the language you'd expect a Romanov daughter to have, casually, as her only real tongue. Another thing a Russian Grand Duchess would never do? Cross herself like a Roman Catholic. Anna did. Imperial Russia was orthodox. Getting that wrong wasn't an accent slip, it was a theological faceplant. Then comes the interpersonal disaster. Pierre speaks to her, tries to get her to talk about the past. She refuses, she bristles, she claims she doesn't recognize him. Later she gives an excuse, he'd shaved his goatee, which is convenient, because if she admits he's her tutor, she has to prove it. If she doesn't recognize him, she can keep the story foggy, and fog is where myths thrive. Olga also meets her. Sympathy, yes. Recognition? No. Olga was Anastasia's godmother. If Sophie Buxhoeveden knew the family like the back of her hand, Olga knew Anastasia by heart. And Olga was not alone. Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich, yes, of Rasputin's murder fame, had been exceptionally close with the Grand Duchesses and refused to meet Anna Anderson at all. At the time, he had other priorities, including a certain French fashion icon, Coco Chanel, but his position never shifted. Anna Anderson, he insisted for the rest of his life, was nothing more than a fraud. Then there were the brothers who did engage, and that's where things get complicated. Grand Duke Andrei Vladimirovich supported Anna Anderson. He was not an impartial judge. To say the Vladimirovich branch of the Romanov family had a strained relationship with the rest of the dynasty would be an understatement. Some accounts suggest that Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna had floated a marriage between one of her sons and Nicholas II's eldest daughter, Olga Nikolaevna. Olga was widely regarded as an exceptional dynastic prize, young, intelligent, and the daughter of a reigning emperor. But the proposal itself raised eyebrows. Many believe the intended candidate was Andrei's brother Boris, significantly older, notoriously dissolute, and an unlikely romantic match. Others suggest Andrei was also considered, with much the same reaction. Either way, the idea went nowhere, and the rejection was not taken well. It was never about love, it was about proximity to the throne, at a time when many assumed Alexei would not survive. His brother, Grand Duke Kirill Vladimirovich, took the opposite position. Kirill had already tried to turn revolution into opportunity and failed. As commander of the city guard, he could have acted early. He didn't, because with Nicholas gone, Kirill believed the throne might simply fall to him. It didn't, and a surviving Anastasia would have crushed any lingering hope of a restored monarchy with Kirill at its head. And then there was the money. Rumors of hidden Romanov wealth lingered for decades. A recognized Anastasia could open doors or could ruin everything. A self-proclaimed Tsar could claim everything. Anna Anderson, real or not, was useful, depending on who you were. And eventually, despite the pity, despite the human horror of seeing a damaged woman in a hospital bed, Pierre Gilliard publicly comes down against her claim. This matters because Gilliard isn't some distant cousin chasing gossip. He's a witness with actual proximity, and he's not buying it. Now enter one of the most emotionally loaded supporters, Gleb Botkin, son of Dr. Eugene Botkin, the Romanovs' physician who was murdered with them in 1918. Gleb had known the children in that orbit, and like many people tied to the family, he wasn't just defending a woman, he was defending meaning. Because if Anastasia lived, then maybe the basement wasn't the end. Maybe loyalty mattered. Maybe sacrifice wasn't pointless. Maybe the story didn't conclude in blood. So Botkin becomes her champion. And once you have a champion, you get articles, patrons, donors, society hostesses, lawyers, schemes, and the faint smell of money. Because it's not just belief now, it's a potential inheritance, a Romanov fortune, foreign accounts, hidden deposits. The myth evolves into a business plan. Botkin and an American lawyer, Edward Fallows, begin legal maneuvers around Romanov assets outside Soviet reach. A corporation is even created to raise funds around the idea of Anastasia's claim. And this is where the story goes from tragic to faintly embarrassing. Because suddenly we're not asking, is she Anastasia? We're asking, if she's Anastasia, who gets paid? And that is the moment every spiritual mystery turns into a financial mudfight. By 1928, Anna goes to the United States, backed by supporters and patrons. She arrives like a living tabloid headline. New York society eats it up. Because American high society has always loved two things. 1. European titles. 2. A woman with a mysterious past, preferably traumatized, preferably glamorous, preferably controllable. She stays with wealthy supporters, including a woman on Park Avenue who becomes devoted to her. The press circles. And Anna, who already had mental health issues and instability in her story, begins to unravel publicly. There are tantrums, there's chaos, there's behavior that reads less imperial survivor and more deeply unwell person being paraded around for entertainment. At one point, she kills a pet parakeet. At another, she ends up running around naked on a roof, which is not proof she isn't Anastasia, to be clear. It's proof that this whole situation is a slow-motion exploitation event. Eventually, she's committed to a sanatorium, and after more turbulence, she returns to Germany. Back in Europe, pressure grows to actually verify who she is. A private investigator digs, and a name surfaces: Franziska Schanzkowska, a Polish factory worker, a woman with a history of mental illness, a woman injured in a munitions factory accident during World War I, a grenade explosion, head trauma, a death in front of her. A woman who later disappears in 1920. Sound familiar? Because the timeline slides into place a little too neatly. A family member, Franziska's brother, Felix, is brought to see Anna. Accounts differ on what happens next. Some say he recognizes her as his sister. Some say he suggests something vague about resemblance. Some later suggest he knew and chose to let her stay in the better life she'd stumbled into. And that ambiguity becomes part of the reason the myth survives, because certainty kills romance. And this story runs on romance. This doesn't end with one dramatic reveal, of course not. It becomes a legal war, for decades, in German courts. A case that drags on so long it basically qualifies for retirement benefits. Anna's side can't conclusively prove she's Anastasia. Her opponents can't conclusively prove, to the court's satisfaction, that she's Franziska. So the courts land on the most bureaucratically German ending possible. After years and years of proceedings, the ruling is essentially not established, neither proven nor disproven, which is the legal version of, "We are tired, please stop emailing." Meanwhile, public opinion keeps ping-ponging, because public opinion doesn't require standards of evidence, it requires vibes, and Anna had vibes. Many of the surviving Romanov relatives sign a declaration denouncing her as an imposter. They're not subtle about it. They basically say, this is a fairy tale, and it's insulting. People like Prince Felix Yusupov, yes, that Yusupov, dismiss her brutally, calling her a frightful play actress, which, to be fair, is the most Felix Yusupov way to call someone a fraud. Others who knew the children, like the English tutor Charles Sidney Gibbs, also denounce her as a fraud. So you have this constant split. Supporters, she has scars, she has trauma, look at her feet, look at her face. Opponents, she doesn't know us, she doesn't speak the languages, she can't tell coherent memories, and she looks wrong. And Anna herself? She keeps the center of the maze exactly where she wants it. Fog, refusal, occasional detail, occasional rage. Just enough to keep the believers believing, just enough to keep the doubters arguing. Late in life, Anna goes back to America. She ends up in Charlottesville, Virginia, and then she marries a man named Jack Manahan, younger than her, in what reads like a marriage of convenience with a side of performance art. They live like eccentrics, surrounded by animals, clutter, and decay. It's not a fairy tale ending. It's a human ending. A woman who spent decades as a symbol, collapsing back into being simply a person. She dies in 1984, and for a while that should have been the end. Except the myth still had oxygen. Until the 1990s, when the Romanov grave is found, exhumed, and tested. DNA confirms the remains of Nicholas II, Alexandra, and 3 of their daughters. And later testing compares Anna Anderson's DNA, from preserved tissue samples, against Romanov relatives, including the late consort of Elizabeth II, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, whose grandmother was Princess Victoria of Hesse, Alexandra's elder sister. And the result is the final, unromantic, merciless ending. She is not related to the Romanovs. Her DNA matches the family line of Franziska Schanzkowska. And in 2007, a second grave was discovered near the original Romanov burial site. The remains belonged to Alexei Nikolaevich and to the one daughter missing from the first grave. So the great question, did Anastasia survive, finally gets the answer history refused to give for most of the 20th century. No, she did not. None of them did. Here's the part people don't like to admit. Anna Anderson didn't become famous because she was convincing. She became famous because the world needed someone to survive. And once people emotionally adopt a survivor's story, they will defend it like religion. They'll ignore language, they'll ignore memory, they'll ignore contradictions. They'll ignore the basic reality that trauma doesn't magically turn you into a different person with a different tongue. And some of her supporters weren't just hopeful, they were invested, socially, financially, psychologically, because if Anna wasn't Anastasia, then what were they? Not rescuers, not believers, not guardians of a lost princess. Just people who got played, or who played along. And nobody likes that ending. So for decades, the world chose the softer lie. Maybe she escaped. Maybe the basement didn't take her. Maybe the story had an exit door. But history rarely offers exit doors. It offers receipts. And eventually, DNA handed in the receipts. So yes, this is an is she, isn't she saga. And the ending is, she isn't. But the reason it lasted so long? Because grief is persuasive, and a princess-shaped hole in the 20th century was very, very profitable.